Welcome back to Ignite the Fire,
Yeah.
where we unpack some powerful messages coming out of Flame Community Church.
Mhm.
This week's sermon, wow,
Oh, yeah.
really struck a chord with me. I don't know about you, but I'm always fascinated by how seemingly simple concepts
Right.
can reveal such depth when you really dig in.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened with this message on praise.
It was interesting how the sermon started, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That anecdote about the visitor being told to quiet down their praise really set the stage for a deeper exploration.
Oh, it definitely did.
Yeah.
I mean, how often do we find ourselves holding back, even stifling our enthusiasm for God,
Right.
especially when we're not in a church setting?
Yeah.
The sermon seemed to challenge that unspoken rule
Right.
right from the get-go.
And it went on to use Psalm 150 as a springboard
Mm-hmm.
for a deeper dive into what praise actually is.
Yeah.
The sheer repetition of the word praise in those 6 short verses is striking,
Yeah.
almost like an overflowing of emotion.
12 times. It really does feel like the writer was practically bursting with excitement, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I can almost picture them scribbling it down frantically,
No.
like they couldn't get the words out fast enough.
That's a great image. The sermon compared it to someone desperately trying to jot down an amazing idea before they forget it.
Right.
And that escalating intensity building from quiet reverence to almost ecstatic shouting really mirrors the emotional arc of the psalm itself.
Speaking of intensity,
Yeah.
the preacher's delivery definitely matched the message.
Oh, yeah.
It got me thinking, when was the last time
Uh-huh.
I felt that passionate about sharing my faith?
It's a question worth pondering, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the sermon went beyond just emotional intensity. It challenged us to think about where and how we praise.
Yeah.
Remember the connection to Psalm 139 and the idea that since God is omnipresent,
Right.
shouldn't our praise be too?
That was a powerful point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the idea that praise belongs solely within the walls of a church.
Right.
But Psalm 139 suggests a much broader, more integrated view.
And the sermon acknowledged the comfort we often find in praising as a group, then challenged us to tap into that same spirit of praise in our everyday lives, even when we're alone.
I appreciated that honesty. It's definitely easier to raise your hands and sing along when you're surrounded by others doing the same thing. But translating that energy into everyday moments,
Yeah.
that's where the real challenge lies, wouldn't you
I
say?
think so, yeah. It is a challenge, but the sermon gave us some really practical tools to work with. Remember how it highlighted the variety of instruments mentioned in Psalm 150? That always fascinates me.
Me too. And the way the preacher connected those instruments to the idea of using all our abilities to praise God was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's not just about singing hymns or playing music. It's about leveraging every talent, every skill, every aspect of who we are to express our gratitude and awe.
Exactly. It broadens the whole concept of praise, pushing us beyond those traditional, sometimes limiting forms of worship. I love that image of every breath being a form of praise. It's such a beautiful way to think about how interconnected our lives are with God's presence.
It really is. It makes you realize how much potential for praise we have in every single moment. But then the sermon went on to address a common misconception, the idea that problems magically disappear when we praise. I thought that was really insightful.
It's a tempting belief, isn't it? But the preacher clarified that praise isn't about erasing difficulties. It's about shifting our perspective, allowing that sense of gratitude and awe to lift us above the challenges we face.
And he used some incredibly powerful stories to illustrate that point. Remember the story of Jehoshaphat leading his army into battle with the choir at the front. Talk about a bold move.
It's a story that always sends shivers down my spine. Imagine the courage it took to face a terrifying enemy with song instead of swords. It really underscores the idea that praise can be a powerful weapon in spiritual warfare.
And speaking of powerful stories, we can't forget Paul and Silas singing in prison. That image of the prison doors swinging open and the chains falling off is so vivid, so full of hope. It makes you wonder what was going through their minds as they sang. Do you think it was a desperate plea, an act of defiance, or maybe a deep, unshakable faith that transcended their circumstances?
I love that question. It really gets to the heart of what authentic praise is all about, doesn't it? Because it's not about putting on a show or pretending everything is okay. It's about choosing to focus on God's goodness and power, even in the midst of suffering.
And their story shows us that praise can have a real, tangible impact. The sermon encouraged us to tap into that same power, to use praise as a way to find freedom from whatever might be holding us back.
It was a powerful call to action, but it also emphasized that true praise should be rooted in surrender, We can't just go through the motions. There needs to be a genuine submission to God's will.
That's a crucial point. It reminds me of that famous line from the hymn, I Surrender All. True surrender requires sacrifice, a willingness to put God's desires above our own.
And when we make that choice, when we let go of our need to control and simply trust in God's plan, authentic praise flows naturally from that place of obedience.
It's like the example of Peter leaving his nets to follow Jesus. He didn't hesitate, didn't try to bargain. He simply surrendered to God's call.
That act of surrender was the foundation for everything that followed. And in the same way, when we surrender our lives to God, our praise becomes less about duty and more about a heartfelt response to His love and grace.
The sermon also challenged us to think about how we express our faith in everyday moments. I loved that example about praising God when your favorite team wins.
It's such a simple but profound idea, isn't it? Because it's not about turning every little thing into a grand spiritual gesture. It's about recognizing God's presence in every aspect of our lives, even those seemingly insignificant moments.
It's like training ourselves to see the world through a lens of gratitude, acknowledging that every good thing comes from God.
Exactly. It's about cultivating an attitude of praise that permeates every aspect of our lives. And as we practice that, as we become more intentional about expressing our gratitude, we'll start to see the transformative power of praise unfold.
It's almost like a spiritual muscle we need to exercise. The more we use it, the stronger it becomes.
And as we make praise a more consistent part of our lives, we'll experience its ripple effects. We'll find ourselves more resilient in the face of challenges, more joyful in the midst of trials, and more connected to God's presence in every moment.
It's not just about feeling good. It's about changing the way we see the world and our place in it.
Precisely. And as our perspective shifts, our actions will follow. We'll naturally express our gratitude and awe in everything we do.
I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. Praise becomes less about duty and more about a heartfelt response to God's love and grace. And as we wrap up our deep dive into this powerful sermon, let's leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Thinking back to the sermon, what resonated most with you? What image or idea really stuck with you?
For me, it was that challenge to weave praise into the fabric of everyday life. I kept coming back to that image of praising God when your favorite team wins.
Right.
It's so simple, yet so profound.
It really is, because it's not about forcing grand gestures or making a spectacle of our faith. It's about cultivating an awareness of God's presence in every aspect of our lives.
It's like that shift in perspective we were talking about earlier. When we approach life with an attitude of gratitude, those moments of praise become more natural, more spontaneous.
But I think that's what the sermon was ultimately getting at. It wasn't just about praising louder or more often. It was about allowing that spirit of praise to flow out of a heart surrendered to God.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true praise isn't a performance. It's an overflow of a heart filled with gratitude and love for God.
And when we reach that point, when praise becomes less of an obligation and more of a reflex, that's when we truly begin to experience its transformative power.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the message of praise, here's a question for you to ponder. How can you make praise a more natural part of your life, both inside and outside of church? What are some practical steps you can take this week to cultivate that attitude of gratitude and let your praise flow more freely?
Maybe it's starting each day with a simple prayer of thanks. Maybe it's finding a new way to use your talents to glorify God. Or maybe it's simply taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of creation and acknowledging the one who made it all.
The possibilities are endless, really. And as we open ourselves to those possibilities, as we allow praise to become an integral part of who we are, we'll discover a joy and a freedom that transcends our circumstances.
So until next time, let's keep those flames burning brightly, fueled by a heart overflowing with praise.